Who was he? The man who wrote the letter that was never sent. An American officer in the midst of World War II, or a lover who never made it home. This story isn't found in textbooks, nor does it appear in Hollywood films, but it's real and heartbreaking in its silence. The name Thomas Edward Marlowe doesn't strike you when you first hear it. It doesn't echo like those of famous generals, doesn't show up in war reports, and isn't attached to medals or glorious victories. But men like Thomas, quiet, devoted, faceless, and nameless, are the true backbone of war. Thomas was born in 1918 in a small rural town in Iowa, where prairies stretched to the horizon and winters cut through the skin. His father was a World War I veteran, a stern man of few words, but each word etched deeply into Thomas's memory from a young age. You don't fight to be remembered. You fight so others can live. That sentence, short as it was, became the compass of his entire life. Thomas grew up during the Great Depression, when Americans had to tighten their belts, when a single loaf of bread could be stretched into 3 family meals. But through hardship, he held firm to an unshakable belief that America would rise again, and he would be part of it. He didn't dream of becoming a general or chasing glory. He just wanted to be a good man, like his father. A boy who dreamed of the sky, a man who chose the ground. Interestingly, during high school, Thomas dreamed of becoming a pilot. He would often go out to the fields to watch planes fly overhead, his eyes following them as if trying to swallow the entire horizon. But his eyesight didn't meet the requirements. So the dream of flying closed, and another path opened, the infantry. Thomas's childhood best friend Jacob once said, "Thomas was never afraid of dirt or pain. But what scared him the most was not doing something that mattered." Perhaps that's why, right after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941, Thomas was one of the first in his county to enlist. No hesitation, no waiting, no need for encouragement. From training to the battlefield, the journey of a model soldier, Thomas trained at Fort Benning, Georgia. In his short time there, he displayed excellent leadership qualities. Patient, firm, but extremely fair. He never shouted without reason, never left the weak behind. He was quickly promoted to lieutenant, then captain, all within 18 months, something rare at the time. But Thomas never let rank change who he was. He still washed his own clothes, shared his rations with younger soldiers who had caught a cold, and never missed writing a letter home each week. Every letter, long or short, began with 2 words: "Dearest Eleanor." Eleanor, a love like sunshine amidst war. Eleanor Bennett was an elementary school teacher in Des Moines, whom Thomas met during a spring festival. They met while volunteering to hand out free bread to the poor. One drizzly evening, they sat under a church awning, and Eleanor joked, "If it rained for the rest of our lives, would you sit here with me forever?" Thomas didn't answer. He just smiled and gave her his military coat. And from that day on, they were never apart. Before shipping out to Europe, Thomas proposed to Eleanor at the train station. No ring, no flowers, just a whispered promise carried by the wind. "I'll come back if you're still waiting." The captain of hearts. Not a battlefield hero, but a hero to others. In Europe, Thomas's unit was among the first to land in Italy and advance toward France. He didn't write much about the war. His letters only mentioned tired but resilient comrades, relentless rain, and longing for a hot meal. He always hid the brutality, perhaps to spare Eleanor the worry. A soldier under Thomas's command once recalled, "We got lost in the forest for 2 days. No food, no support. And it was Captain Marlowe who carried the wounded, comforted the crying rookies, and gave up his rations to the exhausted. I never saw him falter." They say war reveals the true nature of a person. If so, Thomas Marlowe is living proof that kindness can survive even in hell. A great void, and the letter that was never sent. But then, on December 18, 1944, Thomas's unit received orders to scout through the Ardennes Forest. No one expected it to be the fateful day. A brutal ambush occurred. No one survived. No one came back. No one knows how Thomas died, or how he fought. No one knew except a letter never sent, found in a scorched backpack 2 months later. Do you wonder what that letter said? Why did Thomas keep it on him like a sacred talisman? And how did it survive intact amidst the inferno of war? Closing scene. A whisper from the past. The story of Captain Thomas Marlowe is not merely a soldier's biography. It's a mirror reflecting loyalty, devotion, and unconditional love. A man of ordinary origin who lived with extraordinary courage. How many people in this world have lived like Thomas, not needing their name to be remembered, just needing to live by what they believe in? Perhaps that's why that letter remained intact, to tell the story Thomas never had the chance to voice. Can a heart in love hear the call of death? Can a man, knowing he may not return, still choose how he says goodbye? When the winter of 1944 blanketed Europe in white, the battlefield no longer echoed with cheers of victory. Only the whistling wind remained, and the shadows waiting to vanish into snow. And in that frozen place, in the dark, dense forest called Ardennes, Captain Thomas E. Marlowe's unit received a fateful reconnaissance order. It began with what seemed like a simple command. December 16, 1944. Captain Marlowe's reconnaissance platoon was stationed at the edge of the village of Bastogne, southern Belgium. The mission was delivered. Advance eastward, pass through a thin strip of forest, and check for German presence to clear the way for the battalion behind. Just a light walk? Maybe the Krauts are gone already, a young sergeant muttered. Thomas said nothing. He only looked up at the sky, then toward his inner jacket pocket, where the unsent letter lay. By then, Thomas had finished writing to Eleanor. A long letter unlike any before. He hadn't signed it yet. Something held him back. A premonition, a fear, or just exhaustion from 3 years of combat. No one knew, not even him. If something happens, will she understand why I stayed silent until the end? Would she forgive him, if this letter was all that remained of him? The Ardennes Forest. No one knew what waited in the snow. The Ardennes stretched out with towering trees and fog thick as fate's silent curtain. Beneath the dense snow lay jagged rocks, hidden mines, and eyes watching from the other side. The Germans hadn't retreated. They were lying in wait. It was the start of the Ardennes offensive, Hitler's last major counterattack on the Western Front. But Thomas's platoon had no idea. Their map was outdated. Their radio scrambled. The sky was overcast. Recon planes couldn't assist. They walked into the forest, like shadows stepping backward into oblivion. Each footstep, each breath. They had no idea they'd already been seen. Reconnaissance is a job of silence. Thomas led the formation, always several dozen paces ahead to secure visibility and reaction time. He had learned that survival didn't come from luck, but from instinct. Those vague signals no one teaches you. And at 4:38 a.m. on December 18, 1944, that instinct sliced through him like a cold blade. "Stop!" Thomas signaled. Everyone froze, holding their breath. But it was already too late. The ambush struck like a nightmare. There was no warning siren, no opening gunfire, just a burst of MG-42 machine gun rounds slicing through the air like a saw blade. Bullets rained down from both sides of the forest. The ground exploded. Bodies dropped like torn rag dolls. Blood splattered across the snow. Bright red, exposed, freezing cold. Thomas lunged toward the sergeant who'd been hit, dragging him behind a rock ledge. But a shard of shrapnel struck his own side. He didn't scream, didn't cry out. He gritted his teeth and kept trying to command. "Spread out! Fall back to the original point!" But they couldn't. The way back was blocked. The radio was silent, and every signal vanished into nothingness. 10 men, then 7, then 3. The platoon originally had 13. After 17 minutes of combat, only Thomas and 2 young soldiers remained, Joe and Harold, hiding in a snowy ditch beneath a thick bush. Joe's leg was broken, blood soaking through his shirt. Harold was trembling, just 18, had never kissed anyone, never sent a letter home. Thomas took off his outer coat and draped it over Joe. Then he pulled out his letter and slipped it into the chest pocket of Harold's jacket. "If I don't make it out, give this to her." Harold shook his head. Silent tears rolled down his face. "No, Captain. Don't say that." But Thomas simply gave his shoulder a gentle squeeze. He knew. He had always known. This was where he would remain. A blast. The fog parted, and the figure vanished into history. No survivors were found that day. When reinforcements reached the site 2 weeks later, they found only spent shells, scattered remains, and a charred backpack half buried in snow. Inside, a blood-stained map, a faded photo of Eleanor, and a letter, unsent, but untouched. A question suspended in history. How did Thomas die? No witnesses, no intact body, no cross on a grave. Just a file. MIA, missing in action. Eleanor never received an official word. Every year, on December 18th, she would light a single candle by the window. "If you're still alive, know that I'm still waiting." But why was the letter found intact? When it was discovered, the letter had been wrapped in 2 layers of plastic, hand-stitched, and stored inside an empty cigarette case, perfectly waterproof. A method not everyone would think of. Who did it? Thomas? Or Harold? Or someone who survived, but never came back? Maybe someone quietly made it out alive, carrying the secret and the haunting memory for the rest of their life. In a battlefield engulfed in flames, where everything turned to ashes, the only thing left untouched was a fragile piece of paper. How did that letter survive hell on earth? And what made it a lasting witness to an unfinished love? War always leaves marks. Sometimes it's crumbling walls. Sometimes scars in the mind of a soldier. But there are also marks with no shape. Just something you hold in your hand and feel an entire soul inside. The letter Captain Thomas E. Marlowe wrote to Eleanor in the winter of 1944 is such a mark. A letter never sent. Yet it outlived the man who wrote it. 2 months after the ambush, while the ashes were still warm. February 1945. The Allies had recaptured Bastogne. Units were dispatched to clear the battlefield, retrieve personal belongings, confirm casualties, and, if lucky, find something to return to the soldiers' families. On a morning with light snowfall, Sergeant Holloway's team discovered a patch of scorched rocks and shattered trees in the eastern Ardennes Forest. It was the very site of the brutal clash between Thomas's unit and the German forces. Among the wreckage, they found a military backpack, charred around the edges, but still sealed shut. Inside were a few personal items, a small water-damaged notebook, a folding knife, a photograph of a curly-haired woman standing in front of a train station, and a letter. The letter, hidden like a treasure. It was carefully folded, wrapped in 2 layers of oil-soaked plastic, and tucked tightly into a tin cigarette case. A level of protection so meticulous, it could only mean one thing. Someone considered it the most important item they carried. Who did it? Did Thomas protect the letter himself? Or was it someone else? A survivor who kept it safe as a final promise? The letter was handed over to command. When cross-referenced with the list of missing soldiers, the name Marlowe Thomas E. appeared. They marked his status as KIA presumed, killed in action, presumed. According to protocol, a soldier's belongings were to be sent to the storage facility at Fort Knox, Kentucky. But this letter took a different journey. The letter carrier, a story never told. One of the soldiers tasked with clearing the battlefield that day, Private Alan Beck, later wrote in his post-war journal, "When I held that letter, my hands trembled. I didn't know why, but I felt that this wasn't just ink on paper. It was someone's heart." Alan requested permission from his commander to personally send the letter to the family of the writer. He recorded the recipient's address from the envelope. Miss Eleanor Bennett, 217 Clay Street, Des Moines, Iowa. But Alan didn't mail it right away. Why? Was he afraid? Did the war numb his emotions? Or did he believe that sending the letter would also mean confirming the death of the man who wrote it? May 1945. The war ends. The letter returns. It wasn't until the war officially ended that Alan placed the letter into a new envelope and sent it by post. No message included. No return address. Eleanor received it one afternoon in early June. She was watering plants on her porch when the postman pulled up on his bicycle. An old ivory-colored envelope, worn at the edges. No European postage mark, but she recognized the handwriting instantly. Thomas. Her hands shook. She opened the letter, and inside were the opening words, "Dearest Eleanor." The contents of the letter, a farewell hidden between lines of ink. Thomas didn't mention the war, didn't talk about his mission. He wrote as if he were right beside Eleanor, hand in hand, eye to eye. "I don't know when this letter will reach you, but if you're reading it, I likely couldn't keep my promise to return. I'm sorry. I tried. I really did, right to the last moment." Then he spoke of dreams, of the church porch where they once sat through the rain, of the first time Eleanor laughed after spilling coffee on his shirt, and of what he wanted to do if he made it back. "I want to open a little bookstore with you. Each morning we'll make coffee. You'll read me poetry, and I'll write about people like us, people who loved during war." The letter ended with a slanted line, the ink slightly smudged. "If I can't come back to you, please live for both of us." Eleanor, the keeper of a heart that never returned. From the day she received the letter, Eleanor never married. She didn't live in loneliness, but with choice. One life, one person, one love. She opened a bookstore just as Thomas dreamed. She named it Clay and Ink, nestled on the corner of Clay Street. At the cashier's desk sat an old picture frame. Inside, a photo of Thomas in uniform, standing among pine trees. Beneath it, she wrote in her own hand, "He's still here, somewhere, between the pages I read each day." Why has this letter endured in the hearts of Americans? In 1985, when a local journalist was doing a feature on long-standing independent bookstores, he stumbled upon the story of Eleanor and Thomas. The letter was photocopied and published in the Love in Wartime column of American Remembrance magazine. From then on, the letter became a symbol of a love without an expiration date, of a promise untouched by time. Amid millions of anonymous deaths, how could one woman preserve the memory of a man who vanished into the snow? And how could a single piece of paper, fragile and alone, endure as part of an immortal soul? No one knows for sure when the letter was written. Some believe Thomas wrote it the night before the ambush, following a gut instinct that something was coming. Others speculate that Thomas asked Harold, the young soldier, to safeguard it, and that Harold protected it until his final breath. The strange part: none of Thomas's unit members were ever identified by DNA. Only the backpack and the letter remained as proof they had ever existed. So, did someone survive returning in silence? Some leave the world with the roar of cannons, but others remain quietly, with only a letter and a promise never fulfilled. Eleanor Bennett, an elementary school teacher in Des Moines, never took another step in love after Thomas's letter arrived. No postmark, no date, no sender. Only a slanted line of writing, piercing straight into her heart. If I can't come back to you, please live for both of us. A simple message, but for Eleanor, it was an entire alternate life. A life lived on behalf of someone who had vanished into the snow. After the letter, the final embrace of ink and paper. June 1945. The war had just ended. Americans flooded the streets to celebrate, singing songs of victory. But Eleanor stayed inside her small wooden house on Clay Street, the place she and Thomas once met before he shipped out. She opened the letter once more, then gently folded it, stored it in a tin box alongside the photo of Thomas in uniform, cap in hand, dreamy eyes gazing into the distance. No one saw her first tear, but everyone noticed. Eleanor was never the same again. A love without a grave. 1 week after receiving the letter, Eleanor visited the local government office to ask about Thomas's status. The answer: MIA, missing in action. No name, no remains, no grave. How do you bury someone who has no body? How do you mourn a name that hasn't been crossed off the list of the living? Eleanor held no funeral, didn't wear black, didn't hang Thomas's photo like a memorial. Instead, she framed the letter, placed it on the bookshelf beside her bed. If you're still out there somewhere, I want you to see this letter is still here, right beside me. Clay and ink, where love quietly lived on. In October 1946, Eleanor opened a small bookstore on the corner of Clay Street. She named it Clay and Ink, a simple play on words. But for her, it was a symbol. Clay, the ground where love began. Ink, where the letter became a stain that never faded. No one knew where Eleanor learned to run a business. She had never been a merchant. But her bookstore survived. Through recessions, inflation, even the Cold War. Every morning she turned on the lights, opened the windows, brewed coffee, and read a few pages from whatever book she chose that day. But one thing never changed. On the counter, there was always a vase of fresh flowers and a small photo of Thomas next to the letter. Many customers asked, "Is that your husband?" She would smile, "My fiancé," but he never made it back to propose properly. A widow, without a wedding. Neighbors called her the unwed widow, an odd title, yet always spoken with respect. Eleanor never objected, never denied it, because in truth, she was still living like a wife. No marriage certificate, no wedding ring. But everything a marriage should have: loyalty, waiting, and memory. There was a widower who often visited the bookstore, always bringing white daisies and a gentle invitation. But Eleanor softly declined. "Someone took my heart a long time ago," quietly keeping a lifetime, with no one left to wait for. In 1952, Eleanor adopted an orphaned girl. Her name was Lucy, quiet, reserved, but unusually intelligent. Eleanor told Lucy about Thomas as if he were still alive. She taught her daughter to read in Thomas's voice, taught her to write letters every month, just as she once did. Even if no one writes back, you should still write, because somewhere, they're still listening. Lucy grew up, went to college, married, had children, but she never once saw her mother leave the bookstore. A room, a world no one entered upstairs at the bookstore, was a room Eleanor never changed for nearly 50 years. No one was allowed in, no one cleaned it. It was the place where she reread Thomas's letter once a year, on December 18th, the day she believed he had fallen. Lucy said that on that day each year, her mother would write a reply. "Dear Thomas, Des Moines is colder this year, but in my heart, it's still warm." No one read those letters. No one knew where they were kept. Or perhaps they were sent? Sent where? And did someone, on the other side, ever read them? Her final year, Eleanor and the Strange Dream in 2013. Eleanor fell ill. Doctors diagnosed her with heart failure. Lucy brought her home to care for her. Yet Eleanor still tried, once a week, to sit in her armchair holding an old book, looking out the west-facing window, where the Des Moines sunset always burned brightest. One night, Lucy said, her mother dreamed of Thomas. He was standing beneath the old maple tree, still holding his cap, uniform charred. But his eyes were just like before, not angry, not cold, just quietly watching me. The next morning, Eleanor spoke her final words. "He forgave me, and now he can rest." She passed that very morning, peacefully, as gently as a page turned, a heart that kept its promise. Forever unchanged after the funeral, Lucy began sorting through her mother's belongings. In the attic, she found a small wooden box. Inside were the original letter from Thomas, the annual replies Eleanor had written, an old map of the Ardennes Forest, and a final handwritten note. "If one day you read this, go to that place, lay flowers, and tell him I lived a good life." The final promise, searching for a name without a grave. In 2014, Lucy and her son Ryan, a journalist, embarked on a journey to the Ardennes Forest. They brought with them Thomas's letter, Eleanor's reply, and a bouquet of white daisies. At the marked spot on the map, Ryan read the letter aloud into the wind. Snow began to fall softly. Was this the moment Eleanor had waited for her entire life? Was Thomas, somewhere nearby, smiling because she had finally made it back to him? Final scene. Love doesn't die. It only changes form. They say time heals all wounds, but some wounds don't need healing. They simply need to be remembered. Like the way Eleanor kept Thomas, not through flesh and blood, but through memory, handwritten letters, and a promise. Have you ever loved someone so deeply that you didn't need them to return, only for them to know you never gave up? If you uncovered a promise buried beneath 7 layers of time, would you have the courage to fulfill it? And if you stood in the very place where that person fell, what would you hear? The wind, the silence, or a belated greeting from a soul that never found rest? Ryan Beckett, Eleanor's grandson, had never met Thomas Marlowe, but he was the only one in the family who carried them to the final chapter of a journey Eleanor had begun back in 1945. Ryan was a freelance journalist in Chicago, known for writing real-life human stories. But he never expected that the most haunting story he'd ever write would be that of his own grandmother. An evening bathed in the final sunset. The story begins again. It was the 3rd day after Eleanor's funeral. Ryan was cleaning out the attic of the old house when he found a worn wooden box wrapped in linen, labeled in pale blue ink, "For the one who can continue." Inside were things he'd never known existed. The original letter from Thomas. 41 reply letters from Eleanor, 1 for every year. An old yellowed military map. And finally a note, "Eastern Ridge of Ardennes, near the hollow oak. Place flowers there. And tell him, I kept my promise. Ryan decided to go, but he didn't go alone. Interestingly, Ryan didn't make the journey by himself. He brought along his 10-year-old son, Lucas, the boy Eleanor had once told bedtime stories to. I want to know if great-grandpa Thomas was real. Ryan didn't answer. He just hugged his son and nodded. They left in early September 2014, carrying the letter, a bouquet of white daisies, and a curiosity that couldn't be silenced. Ardennes, where time stands still. The local bus stopped in a small town near Bastogne. The townsfolk still spoke of the ambush in December like it was legend. But when Ryan asked about the hollow oak, no one knew. They said, "The forest has changed, new trees have grown, trails have vanished. Why search for things that no longer exist?" Ryan just smiled. He knew some things, even if invisible, still exist. Like love, like memory, like a promise unfulfilled. They entered the forest, with an old map and a trembling heart. The Ardennes in September was still green, but the damp soil reminded Ryan of the story. Thomas falling into snow. He imagined the footsteps of that man 70 years ago, walking into darkness, not knowing it was his last time. Did he know he was heading toward the end? Or did he simply believe he was clearing a path for others to live? The old map, fortunately, still had value. Though the trails were gone, the hand-drawn stream still flowed gently. Ryan followed it, past a sunken patch of ground, and they saw a large oak tree, its base hollow. Lucas ran ahead. He didn't understand it all, but something made him bow his head. "Dad, I think he's here." The moment where two worlds touched, Ryan took out the bouquet of white daisies and laid it at the tree's roots. Then he opened Eleanor's final letter, the one she wrote in 2013, just before her dream of Thomas. He began reading aloud, word by word, into the wind. "My love, I lived the life you didn't get to live. I raised a child, opened a bookstore, read fairy tales you once loved to thousands of children. But I never forgot you." The wind picked up slightly. A branch swayed, just enough to feel as though someone had passed by. Lucas held Ryan's hand and whispered, "Dad, I think he heard us." Ryan bowed his head. He didn't believe in spirits. But in that moment, he felt something lift from within him, as if, somewhere, a promise had just been fulfilled. The memorial stone, no name, just a vow. Back in the US, Ryan wrote an article titled "The Letter That Lived," recounting the full story of Thomas and Eleanor. The article went viral, spreading across local newspapers and social media, receiving thousands of heartfelt comments. A group of veterans reached out to Ryan, offering to help erect a memorial stone at the very place where he had laid the flowers. 3 months later, a simple stone was placed, bearing the inscription, "Here, a man kept his promise by leaving, and a woman kept it by staying." No name, no rank, no unit. Just two souls, bound by a promise that never shattered. Eleanor, Thomas, and the storyteller. A circle closed. Lucas grew up always remembering that journey. In a high school essay he once wrote, "Love doesn't always need a final embrace to be real. Some love is proven by waiting, longer than a lifetime." Ryan, once just a journalist, had now become a keeper of memory. He compiled all the letters, photos, and journal entries and published a small book titled "The Letter Never Sent." No one expected it to become one of Iowa's best-selling books that year, maybe because we've all loved before. But not all of us have held on to a promise for 70 years. The unanswered question: who kept the letter safe through the ambush? Ryan still wonders, how did the letter survive the firefight? Was it Harold? A fellow soldier who made it out alive and never returned? One theory emerged from an old military correspondence. A nameless soldier, severely wounded, was found west of Bastogne 3 weeks after the battle. Temporary memory loss. Unidentified. He never spoke a final word, was never held one last time, never had a chance to say goodbye. And yet, they still waited, still loved, still believed. And that, not victory or defeat, is what truly makes history. Have you ever been part of words that were never spoken? When Ryan wrote the final line in The Letter Never Sent, he hesitated. Because how do you end a story that never truly said goodbye? How do you close a chapter when the hearts of the reader and the writer are still in that forest? Where a hollow oak stands, where white daisies rest at the roots, and a promise still echoes in the wind. You might ask, why does a simple love story, without a victory, without an ending, without glory, move thousands to tears? Perhaps because we've all been Eleanor, or Thomas, or the child holding a letter they didn't write, but were entrusted to guard until the end of their days. True love doesn't need miracles, only someone willing to keep it alive long enough. We live in an age where handwritten letters have become rare, where promises are often temporary, and love stories, too easy to begin, too quick to abandon. So when people hear the story of Eleanor keeping a promise for 70 years, they can't help but ask, is anyone still patient enough to love someone for that long? If I were her, could I wait? Would I have enough faith to live on for someone who never made it back? These questions don't belong to the past. They belong to the present, to you, the one reading or listening to this story. The letter, the last witness of a love that survived war. The letter Thomas wrote, and Eleanor protected for decades, is now preserved behind glass at the Iowa Military Museum. Below it, a short description reads, "Not an artifact, not a document. This is the heart of a man and the soul of a woman." People still come. They still stand in silence before that case. Some cry, some smile faintly, some simply place a hand on the glass, as if trying to touch words that were never meant for them. And do you know what's most remarkable? Many of them, after reading, go home and write their first letter in decades. Not an email, not a text message, a handwritten letter in ink from the heart. Are we losing something when everything becomes too easy? This story, though it began in war, was never about hatred. Though it revolved around death, it was never dark. Though it ended in loss, it made people want to live more kindly and love more deeply. Because what truly survives 70 years? Not weapons, not glory. Just a letter, a promise, and a heart that refused to forget. I'm not the best storyteller, but if you're still here, still listening, maybe it's because, for some reason, this story touched a part of you, a part you've never told anyone about, a quiet ache, an unspoken word, a what if you've been carrying silently in your chest. You know, after I shared the previous part of this story, I received hundreds of messages, some just a few words, but they read like a silent sob caught on paper. I wish I could forgive. I never said I was sorry. She never knew I waited until the very end. And one message kept me awake all night. I once tore up a letter because I thought I'd never need it. Now I just wish I still had it, to read one last time. I don't tell stories to entertain. I tell them so we can remember. We live in a world that moves too fast. Everything's urgent. People send messages without expecting a reply. They call each other by nicknames, but can't name their real feelings. So when you pause to listen to a story like Thomas and Eleanor's, It's not because it's tragic. No, it's because it's honest. Because it hurts in the right places. Because it feels like you, like me, like all of us. People who still don't know what to do with the chapters we never got to close. So, do you have a letter? It doesn't have to be written in ink. Maybe it's an unsent voice memo, a forgotten note on your phone, a name you still type into the search bar, but never press Send Friend Request on. Keep it or send it? Thomas never got to send that letter. But you? You still have time. You still have the chance. The question is, do you have the courage to do what he never could? Or will you be the one who keeps a letter in a drawer for life, only to realize one day that the person you meant to send it to is no longer there? The human heart isn't afraid of loss. It's afraid of almost. There's a strange truth. We often accept loss more easily than facing the pain of a missed chance. Do you see yourself in that? We're not really afraid they won't read the letter. We're afraid that if we send it, the feeling might no longer belong to us. But if we don't send it, that feeling becomes something sealed in silence. No one will ever know. No one will ever touch it. No one will ever reply. No one will ever understand what you truly felt. Would you dare to let someone know they were loved? That they were forgiven? That they were waited for? I know this isn't easy. Speaking out is sometimes scarier than holding it in. Eleanor didn't write letters so Thomas could read them. She wrote them so she wouldn't drown in the words she never got to say. And what about you? Who is the person inside your unsent letter? Are they still alive, or only living in memory? Let me hear your story. I don't need your name. I don't need your age. I don't need to know whether you're a man or a woman, or what city you live in. I just want you to answer one question. If you could write a letter right now to anyone, what would you say? Leave a few lines below. A sentence, a name, a feeling. Write it so you can breathe. Write it so someone else can read it and realize, it's not just me who's ever felt this way. Why should you share? Because this is no longer about Thomas and Eleanor. It's about you. You think they're characters from an old story? They're not. They're a metaphor for you, for the one who once loved but never spoke it, for the one who once regretted but never admitted it, for the one who remembers but never dares say they still do. You're not alone. There are thousands of people reading this right now, alongside you. And maybe if you're brave enough to share, someone else will be brave enough to share too. And just like that, two strangers might help each other let go of something they couldn't release on their own. I'll tell you something I've never told anyone. While writing this story, I opened an old letter, one I had written to my best friend, someone I lost 12 years ago. Through a story that spanned generations, from the battlefield of Ardennes in 1944 to a small bookstore in Des Moines, to the journey back to where a soldier once fell 70 years ago, we didn't just witness a love story. We witnessed the power of something deceptively small. A letter. Don't wait too long to say what you truly feel. Time might take away the person you love, but it can never return the words you never got to say. We live in an age where real connection is too easily lost. We stay silent, thinking we have more time. We hold back our emotions, afraid of rejection. We miss our chances, thinking, I'll say it tomorrow. But what if tomorrow never comes? Live like Eleanor. Brave enough to love. Brave enough to wait. Brave enough to keep a promise. And live like Ryan. The one who didn't let the story stay buried. The one who showed us that anyone can finish what was left undone, if they're brave enough to begin. Now it's your turn. Is there something you've been holding in that you've never said out loud? Is there someone who needs to hear, "I'm sorry" or "I miss you"? Have you ever received a letter you never dared to open? Share it in the comments below. Sometimes, just one sentence from you can be enough to help someone realize they're not alone. If this story has touched you, share this video and subscribe to the channel so I can keep telling the stories that history almost forgot. Because who knows, the next story might be yours.